Mi nombre es Jocelyn Baena y estoy con Liz Monge Pacheco y David Márquez. Primero que nada, gracias por aceptar hacer la entrevista. Y pues el enfoque de la entrevista es para aprender sobre su activismo. Y para empezar con la primera pregunta, ¿podrían contarnos un poquito sobre su historia personal y cuál es su conexión con el idioma de español y la comunidad latina?
En mis orígenes soy Liz Monge. El Pacheco fue el nombre de matrimonio después. Y si nos ponemos técnicos, es Liz Monge Murillo, porque mi papá es monje y mi mamá es Murillo. Mi historia se conecta a la identidad, a mis raíces latinas, ¿no? Y mi identidad por el hecho de que mis papás son migrantes. Mi mamá es del DF de México y mi papá es de Escazú, Costa Rica. Soy mexitica. Um, como quien dice, soy first generation, ¿verdad? Primera en la familia en estudiar, terminar la secundaria. Mis papás llegaron aquí cuando eran chamacos, ¿no? Mi mamá tenía como 15 años, mi papá unos 17. Se conocieron en un cine en el barrio más racista de Chicago, que es Bridgeport. Anyway, yo por cosas de la vida, ¿no? Porque yo sabía que si yo, siendo la hija mayor, si yo quería estudiar, me salí de la casa y no tanto por mis papás, sino por mi abuela, que era tan estricta y no me dejaba hacer nada. Por el lado de mi mamá. Y yo me salí de mi casa, me independicé a los 17 años y primero estudié en un colegio comunitario y luego me fui a NIU como estudiante no tradicional a los 21 años, acabados de cumplir. Como quien dice, volví a nacer porque yo era muy apegada a mi identidad latina, pero no sabía mucho sobre mi historia. Mi primer día de clases en NIU, y es recién cumplido los 21 años, primer día, primer clase, y estoy en una clase y me dicen, oh, tú estás aquí por privilegio. You're here because of affirmative action. Siendo que they didn't know why I was there. I had 3 jobs. I had to work my way through school, and my parents could not afford to do anything. So I was there out of my own sheer will. I mean, I even worked in a sewing factory, the midnight shift at NIU one year. David knows I did so many odd jobs. So did he. We were like the workers in the group of Pueblo. And later on, so would other generations be. But at that time, we did the hustle that we had to do so that we could stay in school. And so for someone to make the assumption that I was there because of affirmative action, when financial aid had actually lost my paperwork, and thank God I made copies of everything, because at the time nothing was electronic, because I was lost in the system. That actually happened to me several times at NIU, and I started to wonder if it was on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And so there I go, and I was on that day one trying to figure out, am I going to be able to stay in school? And then I hear that, and then I'm walking across the lawn, and the first thing I see is a swastika, and I'm like, what on earth am I doing here? And then I couldn't even find tortillas. We're at the corn capital of the universe, and you can't find a damn tortilla at NIU. So hence my relationship with Burritoville, where I went to the counter and said, can you please sell me a dozen of tortillas, some frijoles, and some salsa, because I can't find tortillas. And I'm sorry, but the Mission tortilla at Walmart was not cutting it for me. And so, there I was missing my family and not able to find tortillas. Day one. And then I decide to go and sit in on a class because I had never heard of a class called Latinos in the US. And I walk in, and it's supposed to be a class of 25, but there's like 150 of us slammed into that room, no seating areas. And there's this crazy looking I couldn't tell if he was Latino, Native American, Chicano, but his name was Mike Fraga. And Mike Fraga ended up becoming one of my mentors. But there is this man, and he's talking about indigenous history, and he says Christopher Columbus didn't discover America. And that's why I say que fue un renacimiento, porque, o sea, sacudió todo lo que yo entendía de lo que era la identidad de mi historia en Estados Unidos, ¿no? And oh, wait a minute, what do you mean Christopher Columbus didn't discover America? And I got introduced to this idea of colonization. So then he asked us this question. We had to write our name on an index card. And you had to say your name. And he was the first professor in my entire life that said my name the right way. Oh, Miss Monje, because everybody called me Manji, Mangi, Mango, Monkey, you know, everything but Monje. And from that point on out in my life, I just said my name the way it was supposed to be said, Monje, not Manji. I stopped Americanizing it, right? And he was like, what are you? Are you Latina? Are you Hispanic? Are you Chicana? Are you mestiza? Are you whatever? And so I gave him back the index card blank. And he was like, Miss Monge, why are you giving this back to me blank? And then I said, I cannot answer a question to which I do not know the response, because I don't know what I am. And so that started probably one of the best relationships. And he's like, my office hours, come see me. And from that point on out, I took all of his classes. We were switched to a lecture hall, and there were 100 and something of us looking to find who we were. And that was day one at NIU.
Y me da risa porque yo conocí el profe más tarde, ¿verdad? Pero a mí me dio la misma pregunta. Yo no tomé clase de él, pero lo conocí. Y me dice, ¿y qué tú eres? And I'm like, I'm Puerto Rican. What do you think? Like, he's, he started laughing. He goes, yeah, only you Puerto Ricans answered like that. So, but yeah, I remember Mike. Oh my God. So, bueno, como comenté, yo llegué a NIU, bueno, en agosto 1991. Ya yo tenía los 21 años. So, like, that's why, like, el grupo de nosotros, Pueblo Unido, we were all older when we started the group. So we weren't like 18, 19 years old. We were like adults. Bueno, yo soy de Aurora. Mis padres son de Puerto Rico. Y bueno, yo me fui a estudiar en NIU. I got in through the Chance program, which is an alternative admissions program. No sé si todavía está ahí o no, pero that's the program. That's how I got in. Yo conocí a Nelson y Pablo primeramente, porque Nelson, he was from Aurora too. So our families knew each other. Y un día me invitaron to their dorm, and me empezaron a hablar conmigo, y they started to challenge me. And I remember to this day, Nelson me dice, quítate el chupón. And I was like, what? We're going to fight. Like, I was getting ready to fight. Because for me, I'm a former gang member. So like, I grew, I was on the streets and doing all that. And I was like, what? But I didn't. Entonces me mandaron para atrás el cuarto mío, like, con como dos, tres, cuatro libros, and they're like, read these books. I read them, and I was like, oh, wait, what? ¿Qué? ¿Pero qué? Wait, huh? No, 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 no. And I think, like, most people, because I've seen this with other people too, when they first realize something that they had either hadn't been taught or been told wrong, and it's about your own people, um, you get mad and you get really angry. And part of it, the activism was fueled by that anger. And, you know, luckily we had faculty advisors to help us with that process. So yo le estaba comentando, Liz, que el primer advisor de nosotros was a white guy.
Sakarakis, me
Yeah.
acordé. I couldn't
You know,
remember his last name. Jeff
a
Sakarakis.
Jewish white guy. You remember that? One of the first issues I remember that we took on, it wasn't the Latino Center. I remember that. It was the freshman, the retention rate. If there were like 100 freshmen that came in at NIU, like the following year, like 60% of them were gone. And we were like, whoa, wait a minute, what's happening here? And I remember, I don't know if you remember this, but I think that's where we started to like question the Latino Center.
Yeah, the Latino Center was kind of a galvanizing point because of what was happening with the whole el movimiento estudiantil que empezó en esos tiempos del 91, 92.
Yeah.
But I think at that point we were concerned because at the time when we were at NIU, there weren't even 1,000 Latino students.
Yeah, that's true.
So we made it a point to start conversations about what it meant to be Latino at NIU. Y para eso, and let it be known for the record, right? It was all these guys. It was David, Nelson, Pablo. And then you got me, Liz, from Back of the Yards. And for a little while, Jennifer Morales, who's also Boricua. But at the time, there was no Jennifer, it was me.
Mm-hmm.
And these guys out of nowhere come and talk to me. And I'm like, bueno, ¿y quién son estos boludos? Yo qué tengo que ver con ellos, right? Like, at that time, I was like, machistas, and I was dealing with all these questions of machismo and identity, and I was like, what am I going to do with a bunch of men? Like, what do you mean be part of an organization? So we had to negotiate. There was a real strong negotiation between all of us on why we should form a group and what was the emphasis going to be. And we had battles over this machismo through the years, right? But I wanted to be in a space where I could feel safe. You know, I wasn't sure. And then it turns out that Mike Fraga was behind all of this because he's the kind of the one that brought us kind of all together. And then they started, quote unquote, recruiting. And they were like, you got to go talk to this crazy Latina. And so there I am. And we ended up coming together and we decided, that's what you're talking about, David, because before we came out as Pueblo Unido, we were underground. We were researching all the organizations, the role of Latinos on campus, how many professors there were. And so we ended up researching the Northern Star, and we went to the library and we found these really important data points from a professor that none of us ever met, but his name was Vernon Latin.
Yeah, I think it was Latin.
Yeah, Vernon.
We went to remember that summer we spent some time at the archives.
At the library and the archives. So we went to the archives and we looked up all the data from 1990 to 1970 to see how many Latino custodians, how many Latino professors, how many Latina professors, how many students, and to see the trajectory of Latinos on campus. Well, needless to say, most of them were service providers, custodians and kitchen people. And at the time when we were there, I mean, you could count on one hand the Latino professors, and they were all relegated pretty much to liberal arts and sciences. There were very few across like in actual science or engineering or technology. And I'm really hoping that changed through the years. But it was very interesting because within the Center for Latino Studies, it was separate from the University Resources for Latinos, which was the student support-based center. You had the academic side and you had the student support side. And the director of the academic side was, we called him Gonzo, but it was Dr. Gonzalez. When we decided, after doing all that research, we decided on a name, which would be El Pueblo Unido. because I was fighting against anything masculine representing or feminine representing. I wanted something more androgynous. And then we settled on El Pueblo Unido because we were learning our history and the importance and the significance of that chant across struggles in Latin America. And El Pueblo Unido jamás será vencido, right? And so we said, okay, we're gonna put that in everybody's face, El Pueblo Unido. And we strategically timed it so that our announcement to the university would happen with the start of the new year in 1992, because it was the 500 years of resistance and the fight against Christopher Columbus. Little did we know that the Zapatistas would also announce their coming to the world in Chiapas, right? So then there we were in January, because the semester started in mid-January, and the school newspaper didn't come out until February. So the Northern Star, which we also call the Racist Star, which at the time, the Black Student Union was protesting the Northern Star. And so we also understood, in addition to knowing our identity in the history of Latinos at NIU, that it was very important for us to ally and build coalitions with other groups on campus. And one of the groups that we did that with was the Black Student. Were they called the Black Student Union, or were they called
it was the Black Student Union.
BSU, right?
Yeah.
And then we were building alliances. And then I remember what they were doing is they were disappearing the newspaper. So we staked out with them where the newspapers would appear. And then so they would deliver the newspapers, and then we would be with a car like behind it or on bikes, grabbing all the newspapers and, you know, getting rid of them. And so we did that in support of BSU and their protest of the Northern Star.
Ese día, nobody got a newspaper. I don't know. No sé, Jocelyn, no sé si todavía if they do the Northern Star, the student newspaper. I don't know if they still do
todavía
it.
sí.
Sí, okay. So ese día, and this is right. Ese día, nobody got a Northern Star. Y eso fue todo el mundo hablando de eso. ¿A dónde está el Northern Star? ¿Dónde está el Northern Star? ¿Dónde está el Northern Star? Entonces,
and the reason we did that was because they were racial profiling Black students.
So, la mayoría de las historias que estaba haciendo el periódico, it was a lot of black on white crime, black on black crime was making like the front page. And then like other crime was like on page 8 or 9, cosas así. So that's why we supported the Black Student Union in doing that. And it had effect. It did, because everybody was talking like, hey, where's the Northern Star today? Where's the Northern Star today? And más tarde en ese día, the BSU and ourselves, other people that were finally came out with an announcement saying, we took the newspapers and this is why. So, yeah, pero it was I think one of the best things that we did. No sé si fue la universidad or fue the Star, the actual Northern Star newspaper. Ellos trataron de, bueno, querían mandar a la policía a hacer arresto a nosotros porque decían que, oh, ustedes robaron el periódico. We stole the paper. And we were like, well, no, we didn't steal the paper. It's free. The newspaper's free. So we decided we weren't going to just take one. We were going to take all of them. So we took all the free papers that were there. So, pero yeah, trataron they tried to like, oh yeah, they wanted to press charges and arrest us. And we're like, no, you can't. Like even the police said like, well, the newspaper's free. Like, you know, we get what they were trying to do. You know, should they have taken one like everyone's supposed to? Yeah, but they decided to take all of them. And yeah, see, you know, that was it. Pero with the Northern Star, eso empezó el proceso to start making bueno, haciendo los cambios que the paper needed to do.
Sí hubo un
Sí,
cambio al final después de
sí,
eso.
sí, bueno, empezaron, they did a presidential commission on the Northern Star. So yeah, they started to make changes because the advisor of the newspaper, cambiaron el advisor, I think is what it was. So yeah, then the paper, they started getting more minority or people of color reporters, and they started, they started covering more what was supposed to be covered, student campus life,
Ujú.
not, black on white crime that was happening within DeKalb, within the city of DeKalb. They were reporting on stuff that was happening off campus. It's like, why are you off campus? Like, you're supposed to stay on campus.
So those were actions that happened, but in February of 1992, and mind you, we had been doing research since the summer altogether.
Mm-hmm.
We came out with a series of editorials. So if you look up the old Northern Star, February 1992, and I think for a couple of weeks, we all wrote an editorial in the paper. Me, David, Pablo, Nelson, and I don't know if Jennifer wrote one or not. I can't
I don't
remember.
think she did.
I don't think she did.
I don't think she did.
But we all wrote critiques of the university based on our research. So I took on the Center for Latino Studies for only having a few Chicano classes that they were thinking of cutting, and the lack of diversity, I think, around the conversation of Latino America, because it went from Spain, the Spanish stuff, to a few things about the experience in the US. And what I was challenging was the lack of attention to the experiences and the identity in the US. So each one of us wrote an editorial, and that was our way of announcing ourselves to NIU, El Pueblo Unido, because then everybody started wondering, who is this Pueblo Unido? Because we started showing up in places and we started holding actions.
Yeah.
But in order to get to that point, I go back to those negotiations. So we started researching, what it meant to be Latinos. And then we started doing our own individual internal research, right? What it meant to be a Mexitica in the United States, the experience of being the daughter of migrant parents. David and Nelson are both Boricua. They started looking into what it meant to be Puerto Rico and movements of resistance. And all that knowledge, we started co-constructing our stories. And we started learning about the Puerto Rican Young Lords y el Movimiento Independentista. And we started looking at other student movements. And that's how we found out about like Que Onda Sole at Northeastern as a Puerto Rican newspaper of resistance. We started finding out about just the Puerto Rican independence movement, period, y los prisioneros puertorriqueños. And we started going to events that were held in honor of the prisoners. And then we started learning about Native Americans, and we learned about the Black Panthers, because somewhere in between there, through that trajectory, we meet another professor named John Rice, who's a former Black Panther. Y para esto, Mike Fraga is a Chicano who is tied to the American Indian movement, right? To the connection of what was happening during the civil rights. So here we are sitting with these amazing men who are struggling at the university, because Mike Fraga is an adjunct faculty professor and they will not give him tenure. So then we started trying to research, why is it that Latinos have such a hard time getting tenure, and who are the ones that do get it? And mind you, at the time we had even problems with the word Latino. I still do. Latinx, Latino, Latine, whatever. At the time for our generation, the fight was between Hispanic versus Latino. And so we went with Latino because we were not Hispanic. And so right now I know that in this generation, and a lot of people poo-poo on the younger generations for using the word Latinx or Latine. And I'm sitting here like, you all need to step back, because that's where we were 30 years ago, and we were fighting against Hispanic. So every generation has the right to stand on their experience and their voice to decide how they want to be called.
Yeah.
And if this generation is saying Latin A and Latinx, even if fundamentally it kind of erases identity, right? Because this whole thing is based on the census and it's socially constructed. It doesn't matter. We're going to stand with the younger generation because they're fighting for something better, just like we will.
Who is the law professor, Liz? Remember?
So NIU had the honor of having the first Chicana law professor in the Midwest at NIU's law school.
Yeah.
So on her first day, I became friends with her, Guadalupe Luna.
Yeah.
Guadalupe Luna was a very influential farm worker lawyer and one of the few lawyers in the law school that had actually practiced and won cases, because a lot of the professors in the law school are not practitioners. They're just theoretical. And so here you have Guadalupe Luna. I was standing outside of her door waiting on the first day with flowers. And she was like, "Oh, are you a law student?" I'm like, "No, I'm an undergrad, but I know who you are. And I'm really excited to welcome you to NIU," right? So that was, you know, it was that level of detail. We knew who came in, we knew who went out, we knew what was happening. We also researched every single student organization. So while at the same time we were building Pueblo Unido, Nelson and David went to the Student Senate and they joined the Student Senate. Pablo went, it was building coalition with Alpha Psi Lambda, which at the time was the only Latino, and Sigma Lambda Beta was just starting. And Sigma Lambda Gamma todavía no
that's the other one.
existía. They came on later. They didn't even exist when we were first there. So they came like later at the end of this. So you're talking about, there was only like maybe 5 Latino organizations on campus, and Alpha Psi Lambda was mixed. It was Latino and Filipino, and it was kind of a broad coalition of people. But we became friends with them because we built alliances, and we really worked with Alpha Psi Lambda because they were really service oriented.
Yeah.
And then Sigma Lambda Gamma eventually came around, right? Because at first they were like, "Who are these people?" And so we had to build relationships with everyone. And then we joined OLAS because people were saying that they were trying to accuse us of being elitist and all kinds of stuff. And it wasn't that. We were really trying to build coalitions, right?
Son los revolucionarios. They're this, they're that, son loco, this and that. They wanted this, that. Son Marxists, they're socialists, they're communists. Yeah, everything.
We were all of that.
Al obtener todas las críticas, y ya sé que mencionaron de Northern Star y todo el tipo de luchas que estaban haciendo, ¿lo estaban haciendo solos o tenían apoyo? Porque sé que mencionaron a un advisor, pero ¿no tenían otro apoyo más que de ustedes mismos?
Cuando salimos al principio, ni los profesores podían decir que nos apoyaban, porque había mucha represión en contra de los profesores. So, por ejemplo, por eso Mike Fraga al principio no pudo ser nuestro advisor, because he couldn't. He was in a vulnerable position and he was being attacked by the School of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and he was in the process of trying to get tenure. So él no podía ser nuestro advisor. John Rice por un tiempo no pudo. So the people who stepped up were the people who are already secured on campus.
I remember, like, we used to get like so much information like other students didn't get, like of stuff that was happening within the politics of the school and this and that, pa' aquí, pa' acá. And it I don't know, I can't speak for Liz, but a lot of times I felt like it would just like fall in our lap. We would see somebody, "Oh, hey, let me tell you, come here, let me tell you about this." I'm like, "Oh, okay." But empezando, a lot of Latino professors, and I mean, they didn't want anything to do with us.
Even the students didn't want
Even
anything to do
students
with
didn't want to do anything with us.
until something happened. Then it was like, "Oh, this is happening." Pero para esto, te digo que we didn't, that's why el Pueblo Unido was something bigger than just el Pueblo Unido. Because como te venía diciendo, right, nos organizamos. Eso era la cosa, que no fuimos espontáneos. Veníamos con una estrategia, sabíamos muy bien lo que íbamos a hacer. Y una de las primeras estrategias que hicimos era, we have to change the Latino presence on campus, and that means access and control of resources. So fuimos muy astutos, muy inteligentes para ser estudiantes, porque también estábamos trabajando, sacando las clases y todo, ¿verdad? No, casi no dormíamos. We really casi no dormíamos. Estábamos creciendo la organización, and we were recruiting to see who wants to join us, right? So, en ese primer año fue tan difícil porque mucha gente nos rechazó, pero a la misma vez, David formó parte del Student Senate, Nelson formó parte del Student Senate y fuimos agarrando colmillo, ¿no? Dientes. Fuimos creciendo raíces. Y call it serendipity, call it the universe, but a lot of things started happening ese spring del 92. Y lo que van anunciando que iban a cerrar el URL. Era un rumor, ¿verdad? Y en el URL era donde se reunían todas las organizaciones, donde se hacían todos los eventos, donde venían los papás, donde venían los nuevos estudiantes. Entonces nosotros teníamos enough vision to say, vamos a organizarnos en esta lucha y no vamos a dejar que cierren el URL. Por eso hicimos ese mural. Y empezamos a ir a las reuniones de olas, a sentarnos con olas. Si los grupos hacían eventos, we would show up to support. Si Women's Studies hacía un evento de Women's History Month, we would show up. Si Black Studies hacía algo, we would show up to talk about the Latino and Afro connection.
La otra cosa también que no me recuerdo cuándo, but do you remember, Liz? I don't know if you got the first phone call or si fue Pablo. But either you or him got the first phone call, but we all got the same phone call. Basically, diciendo a nosotros, mira, pórtese bien, déjense de su organizando y todo eso, or te botamos de la escuela. We're going to kick you out of school. You remember that?
Yeah.
On the same, en
Sí.
el mismo día, los cuatro llamaron a Nelson, Liz, Pablo y yo, diciendo la misma cosa. Y I was like, uh-oh.
Ya, por eso teníamos que documentar todo, ¿no? Porque por eso te digo que yo sentía que a veces era como al propósito que empezaban a pasar cosas, ¿no? Y we were organizing, but we hadn't done anything major yet except speak against some things, right?
Regresando un poquito a like the resources that there were on campus, ¿cuándo es que se empezaron a enfocar en el centro, en el Latino Resource Center?
El nuevo que existe.
Sí, como cuando se abrió, cuánto tomó esa lucha para que fuera algo que se creara para los estudiantes.
En tiempo, por el trabajo que yo hacía con no sé si se llama la Student Association, cada año hay una elección para el presidente, ¿verdad? So, ganó este muchacho, un joven, yo lo ayudé, yo lo apoyé. Entonces, en ese tiempo, tú llenabas una aplicación si quería ganarle el punto de ser el student trustee. So, the student trustee was appointed by the student president, right? So, I got appointed the student trustee. So for that, my last year there, 96, 97, I was on the board of trustees. In order to like make improvements on the campus and stuff like that, they have to raise money, and there's a way that they do that and todo eso and whatever. So they wanted to do all these improvements on the west side of campus. They wanted to renovate the Grant Hall, I think it was, and otra cosa que querían hacer. So, vinieron a mí y dijeron, bueno, we're going to le van a dar dinero a ustedes, and we're going to remodel the URL. So, la casita estaba ahí, and we're just going to remodel. And I was like, no, you're going to give us a new building. That's that's what we agreed to. That's what we've been fighting for this whole time. So entonces they said, okay, fine, and we'll give you the new building. And bueno, I said, okay, está bien. And that's kind of how the new building came about. In terms of like what it looks like on the inside and stuff like that. When I first saw it, I was like, it's all right. But hey, we got our own space, So,
Pero esa
pero
lucha fue súper importante porque te
yeah.
cuento que cuando nosotros empezamos, esa no era la meta, ¿no? La meta era apoyar a los estudiantes, student retention, academics, professors, Latino voice. Pero lo que nos fuimos dando cuenta a través del tiempo era que si no nos uníamos a esa batalla to fight for academics and student support resources, que las dos cosas no podían seguir separadas.
Mhm.
So empezamos a poner semillas en el diálogo, porque Latino Studies no tenía realmente un centro. Ganso tenía una oficina.
Yeah.
Y él tenía una biblioteca privada. Entonces nosotros empezamos con chistes. We have to deprivatize that library. We should all have access to those resources. Ganso, why
Yeah.
are you hoarding them, right? Y then en esa lucha con chiste of fighting for the books, porque él tenía una oficina bonita, privada, very corporate, right? Y nosotros decíamos, bueno, ¿y el resto de los profesores que tienen? ¿Dónde está el espacio académico latino? Entonces nos fuimos dando cuenta que he also hoarded the fellowships of where these professors could go study when they went abroad, when they were doing research. Because, professors, in order to become tenured, you have to do research, you have to publish. So él estaba controlando. I learned more about tenureship than I needed to know as an undergrad student, porque yo no sabía lo que era todo ese proceso, pero los profesores empezaron a hablar con nosotros. Nos empezaron a decir qué era lo que estaba pasando. So, en ese momento, in our own fight, we said, no, Latino studies should not be separate from the URL. And we started planting those seeds. If we're going to fight for something, we got to fight for something big. So, esa plática empezó desde el 92. Tiene que haber algo más grande, and we're fighting for something much bigger than just the URL. Porque nos fuimos dando cuenta que lo que le daban al URL era tan insignificante, and the URL would have to fundraise for a lot of its own things, and the students would have to fundraise for all of the programming. We weren't getting funding from student government. So then, ¿qué pasa? Me voy dando cuenta que for Latino History Month, there was only a committee for programming for 3 days, and student government only gave us like $500 or something like that.
Yeah, I remember that.
I went in and I said, I will chair Hispanic Heritage Month. And then I went in for the jugular and I said, okay. I made a fight out of it. I said, there's no way that Latino history is only 3 days. And I led a fight to turn it from Hispanic Heritage Month to Latino Cultural Awareness Committee. Y Latino Cultural Awareness Committee turned it from a committee of 3 days to a year. Every year, this is a tradition, and a $20,000 budget.
Yep.
$20,000 budget. We fought for that budget. Así fue como vino Mario Castillo as the first muralist, the Pilsen. And not only did he come, we were crazy because we went for him too, the same way we went for Valdemar. Mario loved us. Mario ended up commissioning and doing that mural for us practically for free. He's one of the leading muralists of the muralist movement of the 70s in Pilsen in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
How did I find him? I started looking up muralists and I saw that he was teaching at Columbia College in Chicago. And I started writing to him. I said, this is who we are. This is what we're doing. And he said, okay, come meet us in the studio. And we went to go meet him in his studio in Pilsen. Y así empezamos a negociar. He ended up doing an exhibition in the student gallery in the home student center. We put
Mhm.
up his work, and it was led with with Leo Castillo, who was a student, Vicky, remember Vicky? Y nosotros.
Yeah.
And we did
Garcia.
the whole,
Vicky
Vicky
Garcia.
Garcia for Alpha Psi Lambda. And we put up an installation, and Mario Castillo exhibited his work, which is unheard of, for an entire month in our home student center together with student artwork. From that point on out, they had not really done a lot of student artwork in the home student center gallery, and they started doing a lot of student-led efforts after that.
Yep.
So eso fue muy importante, ¿no? En esa lucha, we said, this has to be bigger than just the URL. Y empezamos así. I took over. Then Latino Cultural Awareness Committee empezó el diálogo de Vale, la conferencia, la primer conferencia latina estudiantil, que a mí no me tocó verla, pero esa conferencia empezó bajo el liderazgo que yo empeñé with Latino Cultural Awareness Committee, and then David saw that all the way through. Esa conferencia, la primer conferencia de Vale, la voz latina estudiantil, voz de Alianza Latina Estudiantil, because we were in Alliance. Esa conferencia ocurrió el año después de que yo me gradué en el 96. Y one of the main speakers that was brought to that first conference, oh my God, yo todavía lloro. Las madres de la Plaza de Mayo de los desaparecidos de Argentina vinieron a hablar a esa conferencia estudiantil. Oh,
Yeah.
conocen la historia, ¿verdad? Los desaparecidos de Argentina, de Chile. Oh my God. Anyway, ese fue un momento muy grande y fue la conferencia más grande estudiantil que se había visto en NIU.
Yeah.
Estaba lleno the ballroom.
The ballroom.
Donde hacen
No,
los
is the
banquetes.
ballroom the auditorium or the
We
auditorium?
were in a banquet because you asked me to come and speak, and I had to give a speech.
Yeah. But they spoke, Las Madres spoke in the
En el
auditorium.
auditorium, pero todos los eventos estaban al cupo
And then,
lleno.
yeah.
Y fue una conferencia donde los estudiantes presentaban sus trabajos, ya fueran de arte, de aprendizaje, de identidad, de historia, de todo. Fue algo tan bonito, pero eso no ocurrió al principio, ¿no? Empezó con una semilla en el 92 y en el 96 fue esa conferencia. Entonces, bajo ese vínculo, que la voz estudiantil es súper importante, empezamos a pelear. Y entonces Pueblo Unido, por eso decidió con su símbolo del brown beret, porque los berets no los teníamos al principio, los berets salieron en octubre del 92 cuando hicimos nuestra primera protesta en the MLK Student Union. Y salimos todos, teníamos un plan de seguridad y todo, porque para ese tiempo la que recibía todas las llamadas con amenazas era yo, pues siendo la mujer, porque ya para ese entonces Jennifer se había salido porque estaba embarazada, ¿te acuerdas?
Yeah.
So estaba yo, I was flying solo for a little bit with the guys, and Jen was not there with me anymore. So siempre la que tenía primero, and I was like, here we go again, me llamaban a mí. Hubo un punto en que yo no podía caminar en la noche sola. Los muchachos tenían que venir a recogerme del trabajo.
Yep.
Porque yo no quería caminar sola. Mira, y eso es lo que no hablan. Hablaban tanto de la comunidad negra y latina y la violencia, pero nadie hablaba de la violencia que pasaba en Greek Row. It was like an unwritten code of honor. Nosotros, cuando llegaban freshman students on campus, les decíamos, no salgan solas y mucho menos en la primera semana, no caminen Greek Row solas. Teníamos que prevenir a las mujeres porque era un ritual que a las mujeres freshmen abusaban de ellas y nunca los reportaban. Entonces nosotros decíamos, ¿y quién habla de esos crímenes que pasan en Greek Row? Y uno no podía ni caminar Greek Row porque corría riesgo tu propia, even the guys, right, corrían riesgo de que los golpearan. Entonces nadie hablaba de the racial boundaries que existían en la universidad y lo que uno podía o no podía hacer. Entonces nosotros fuimos los que empezamos a hablar de eso. It's like, if you're going to talk about Black and brown wine, you need to talk about what's happening on Greek Rome and what's happening to the women, freshman women, when they go on Greek Rome. I really hope that doesn't exist anymore. Pero imagínate en ese punto where there were less than 1,000 Latino students on a big research university. We had to take care of each other. Y así fue como la gente empezó a apoyarnos, porque vieron que nosotros no nomás nos estábamos preocupando por lo que me va a tocar a mí, ¿no? Estamos preocupados por lo que está pasando en la universidad. Y así fue que empezó, era cosa tras cosa, ¿no? Like, I'm saying it and I can't believe we did all of that. Pero empezamos así a estar presentes constantemente. Alguien nos pedía ayuda, Liz, que vamos a hacer esto. Ok, díganos los detalles. Y yo venía, Pablo, David, Nelson, ¿cómo ven? Aquí está una propuesta. Do we support or not support? Porque hasta eso, we didn't go rogue. We would always sit together and we would talk it through and we would say, okay, what are the pros? What are the cons? How could this hurt us? How could this strengthen us? And sometimes it was like, well, we really don't know. So let's just take the chance. And we would take the chance.
Y
Yeah.
ya hablaron un poquito de esto y cómo el activismo les afectó en su propia vida en ese entonces, pero ¿cómo les ha afectado ahora en el presente haber tenido esa historia con la universidad y todo eso?
Bueno, I don't know about Liz, but I'm kind of retired. So, cuando gradué, regresé para atrás a mi pueblo. I went back to Aurora, y me quedé organizando, and I got into a lot of like politics and political stuff. I was elected an alderman. I was a campaign writer, political writer, uh, a speech writer. I helped on big campaigns like Senator Durbin from Illinois. I was there when he started. También, well, we don't talk about him too much, but Governor Blagojevich, I was there from the beginning when he first started. And then, like, after a while, I kind of like stepped away from it. Porque, como decía Liz, it affects your sleep and stress and the family, and it took away a lot from my family. I was always having somewhere to go. I was on call, and it just eventually I just kind of like I need to step away from this and live a life where it como like somewhat normal, you know. Um, and Bueno, y entonces ahora, I don't dabble. I don't get involved into really too much stuff, porque I'm just really focused on my boys. I have a 14-year-old and a 6-year-old, and now my 14-year-old is starting to ask questions, because he found he found like all my old NIU stuff, the clippings, and like all the activism stuff and everything. And so now he's like starting to ask questions, and I'm just trying to help him navigate through that, because bueno, las cosas son mucho diferente ahora, it's a climate where if you even question anything, they're talking about taking you out of the country, then sending you back where you came from and stuff like that. And so just trying to help him primeramente grow, gain more of that consciousness, of who he is and who his dad is, and even his mom, um, and um, and just really learning how to use that in a positive way, and especially because I'm here in Georgia now, and Georgia's changed a lot, but just helping him know that, hey, you got to be conscious about things and really doing it through our faith. So the one thing that grew stronger, I got really a lot out of politics. I stepped away from it, and I really got into my Catholic faith, and so helping him understand, like, having that consciousness, and just, and he's like me. If he sees something wrong, he says something. But helping them also understand that, this is how you do it. These are some of the things with the faith that will help you get through that. So, yeah.
Mhm. Eh, Liz,
Liz?
do you want to add something on?
You know, hay algo muy profundo que a mí me pasó en esa trayectoria para buscar mi identidad como mujer, como latina, being on campus y con todo lo que hicimos. Y me enseñó lo que es el poder en números, lo que es el poder en poder sentarse uno y poner todo a un lado. Put yourself aside to sit down at the table with an open mind. Y uno tiene que trabajar con todo tipo de gente. And you have to meet people where they are at, because not everybody's going to be on your side from the get-go, right? Esas lecciones me acompañaron toda la vida, y el reconocimiento de que la lucha la llevaba yo en la sangre, because my dad organized all the lumberyards in Chicago that were under hazardous working conditions. So my dad was a labor organizer. I didn't recognize it then, porque en ese tiempo que yo estaba en la universidad, yo no me llevaba bien con mi papá, porque era alcohólico, ¿no? Mi mamá, que en paz descanse, ya falleció. Mi mamá organizaba a las mujeres en las fábricas because of the sexual harassment of the supervisors and the managers. Because back in the 70s, they would only give you jobs and raises if you did whatever the supervisors wanted or did, right? So you had to fight a lot of harassment. Y mi mamá hizo todo tipo de trabajos porque se separó de mi papá para sacarnos adelante como familia. So eso, parte de estar en la universidad es reconocer de dónde vengo para saber a dónde voy. So eso se ha quedado conmigo siempre, ¿no? Cuando yo me recibí de la universidad, I didn't have a lot of good guidance. I really should have been trained as a school counselor or a school social worker, because that's where my heart has always been. So yo terminé en higher ed, and I was always the quiet one. I didn't like being in the spotlight. I had a hard time. It would take a lot for me to speak publicly. And they had to coach me through that. But once I did it, I would do it and I would be exhausted, right? But I could do it, but it took, that's why I studied communications in school, because I knew that I struggled with communication. So yo terminé in higher ed, and on purpose, because all of us ended up in either politics, studying law, or in youth development work. Y yo me quedé con esa semilla siempre, con que we have to open the doors to higher ed in some way. So yo me fui a trabajar a Moraine Valley Community College, y yo me aprendí en los sistemas de transferring and the Illinois Articulation Agreement, y fui la primer latina que le dieron trabajo en 25 años to an academic advisor at Moraine Valley. So yo enfrenté mucho racismo por ser latina. All the student groups, the Arab student group, the Black student group, the Latino student group, I ended up advising all three groups. And you have to think I was in my 20s. So at the time in my 20s, right, they didn't take me seriously. These women were 40, 50, 60 years old. So then I ended up joining the faculty union, and I was the youngest member ever in Moraine Valley's faculty union. And then at the time, 5 years later, after getting a really good training, I understood transfer systems, I understood universities, I understood all the logistical stuff. I get a call because at the moment, charter schools were just starting in Chicago and they were an experiment. They were not the evil empire that they are now. And I can tell you, there was 7 of us in charter schools. And Pablo, we didn't even talk about Pablo and Nelson and Jennifer, right? They were the other co-founders, and you want to hear their story. But he gave me a call and he said, Liz, we need a college counselor at the school. And so that's how I ended up at Nuestra America and then Young Women's. So what I brought with me all the time, even though I wasn't a trained counselor, I had to bring empathy. I brought this question of who am I? And that question of who am I became the curriculum for how I work with my students in creating their college prep portfolios, for them to think about how they saw themselves as scholars and give them all the technical pieces that they needed to know for how to apply to college and how to get through college.
Mhm.
So that's how I took that with me, right? It was that, who am I? And that's a question that I deal with all the time. It never went away. It's been a part of what I call in developing my stance. So I wasn't on the streets organizing anymore, though I organized, but in a different way. And what we didn't talk about is that en el 92 hubo movimiento estudiantil en todo el país. And there were these fires that happened at Champaign-Urbana that brought all the student organizations out of the woodwork. And we all showed up at Champaign-Urbana to support those students. We didn't know what we were doing, where we were going, what was happening. But we ended up becoming friends with all those student activists from Champaign-Urbana, from UIC, from ISU. At ISU, our friends had created a group called Flames of Resistance. And then at UIC, it was Mecha and the Rafael Cintron Cultural Center, right? It turned out that all these students were fighting for the same things we were fighting for. So then we started organizing in mass. And at the time, there were deportations happening. And I remember all of us went to the March on Washington. A lot of us had graduated. It didn't matter. We all showed up. So what does that do to you? It changes your consciousness. And when the community calls, tienes que decir presente. Tu conciencia no te deja hacer algo menos, ¿no? Cuando uno ya tiene esa conciencia, you have to fight, whether it's in your classroom with your students, whether it's out in the streets, right? Tienes que pelear. So after leaving NIU, I ended up joining an editorial board of a community-based newspaper called Tribuno del Pueblo. And I was a journalist for 10 years, following poor people's economic human rights campaigns and working with those groups and doing political schools. I was part of a group that I don't even know if they exist anymore, but I did that for 10 years, right? And that changed me because I met people like Giovanna Ferreira from the landless people's movements in Brazil. I met the women from Codevima, from Bolivia, Peru, y Colombia, que estaban luchando. And even in interviewing them, while I was interviewing them, one of them got a call that her brother had been murdered, right? So you get connected to all these human rights struggles across the world, and it changes you. It just changes you. And I from that journalism, I had to take a break because my mom died. And when my mom died, that took me on a whole nother journey for the next 10 years of what am I doing? I'm in my 30s and I want to have a baby, right? So I have my daughter who's 16. Our kids are not far apart, David.
I know.
And my daughter was a twin and I lost the twin, but I have her. And I went from that to working with young women. So I started the college prep program in 2 high schools. While I was at Young Women's that year that my mom died, it was the year that Chicago Public Schools started tracking college enrollment. I didn't know that the data from my class of 2004, my first class that graduated at Young Women's, when the data came back, I was coming back from my mom's funeral process, and the principal was waiting for me in front of the school, and she was like, Liz, you have the highest college enrollment rate in the district. And I was like, what are you talking about, Margaret? I didn't even know that they were tracking this stuff. Sure enough, and that they didn't even count all the schools that my girls went to. I ended up like with a 97% enrollment rate at the end of that. Almost 100% of my girls enrolled in 2-year, 4-year HBCUs. And that class was probably the strongest one. Well, once that happened, everybody in Chicago public schools was like, who the heck is Liz Monge? And they started showing up at the door. And they wanted to know what I was doing. I was doing my curriculum of who am I? And I was running a college prep class, and because the principal really believed in my work, right? And I was getting on airplanes and I was visiting college campuses. Like I must have visited over 200 places across the country, and I was networking like crazy. And I was going to the annual conference where all the admissions people go to, and I became friends with the admissions people, and they were taking me out to dinner and they were figuring all this out. And I was telling them, this is who Chicago students are, and this is why you need to take a chance on them. Mm-hmm. So all my entire life was dedicated from that point on out to getting kids into some type of higher ed, knowing, right, that education isn't the answer to everything, but it's the tool that opens doors. Mm-hmm. And we all need to be at that door and beyond.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing when I have students like Daisy Ramirez, who was working in Chance, who is now a doctor. I have all my a lot of my students have outpaced me. They're all doctors now. I have no desire to study a PhD at this point, but I don't know, maybe I will. At this point, right? Like that's what I did, and that's all I did, and it consumed all of me. From that high school experience, because of the work that I was doing, the researchers at the University of Chicago released a study called Potholes. And they started to talk about what got in the way of kids going to college, specifically Black and brown kids. So one of the main researchers of that study came to my school and said, will you be my guinea pig? And can I share my results with you before they get released to the public? Because we're planning to share this with Chicago Public Schools. And at that time, I was running a professional group of counselors who worked in the charter schools, and we had our own professional learning community. And I very much approached that learning community the way that we built Pueblo Unido. I asked the counselors, who are you and why do you do this work? And to this day, a lot of them call me. A lot of the admissions people that I worked with ended up making the jump from admissions at the college level to working in high schools or becoming trained counselors, because they were like, Liz, this is amazing work, and the things that we would do with our students, right? And I had principals that believed in me. From there, I jumped ship and I went to work at the University of Chicago at the Network for College Success. And if somebody would have told me that this Latina, right, who couldn't speak in public for anything, right, would end up working at the University of Chicago when I almost flunked out of high school myself. And I would lead professional development for the entire school district. And I probably worked with over 50 high schools in Chicago. And I helped change their outcomes for post-secondary access and success. I worked with counseling departments and with principals to change their approach on how they treated their students in senior year. Now it's much bigger than just senior year, but at the moment, what was within the locus of my control was talking about junior and senior year. And so, you know, I don't have any regrets. I helped thousands of students enter higher education in some way, and that's what I did.
Gracias por el testimonio. Es muy poderoso saber todo esto y pues sí, como que, like, wow, ¿no? Cómo ha pasado las cosas, y lo siento por lo de trabajo, pero sí ha hecho ha tenido un gran impacto en NIU, porque pues ha ayudado mucho con un estudio que está haciendo la profesora. Podemos ver que ha ayudado a los estudiantes, entonces pues muchas gracias por eso. Y pues sí nos faltó una pregunta nada más, era para los estudiantes. ¿Hay algo que le gustaría decirle a los estudiantes latinos que actualmente toman clases de herencia en NIU o otras universidades? ¿Un consejo o una reflexión?
Lo que yo diría es que la voz estudiantil es imprescindible. Sin esas voces no hay cambio. Y yo sé que ahorita es un momento de represión en este país. Están ocurriendo cosas que nunca habíamos visto antes, muy semejantes a las dictaduras de Latinoamérica, ¿no? O de Alemania, ¿no? Si uno va entendiendo historia, va entendiendo cuál es su lugar en esa lucha. Y yo diría que uno como ser humano siente las cosas. Cuando uno se comunica con todo el cuerpo. Uno siente, ¿no? Lo sientes en el estómago, lo sientes en el corazón, lo sientes en las piernas, en las manos y todo. Y lo que yo diría es que cuando tú sientes algo, no apagues esa voz interna. Hay un dicho from the Native Americans. When your gut is speaking to you, it's your ancestors sending you a message. Listen. So, por más miedo que tengan o inseguridad, yo diría, ustedes son mucho más de lo que se pueden imaginar. Y no dejen que nadie les apague esa luz. Y que cuando uno siente algo, es por alguna razón. Y traten de ver el mundo a través de sus ojos, con una mente abierta, con un corazón abierto, para entenderse a sí mismos y poder entender a los demás. Y siempre hay que tratar de estar on the good side of history. You don't want to be on the bad side of history. Whatever that means for you. If it means showing up for a protest, if it means writing an article, if it means leading a student organization, ahorita no es el tiempo para apagarse o callarse. Ahorita es el tiempo para hacerse fuerte. Y en la universidad uno aprende lecciones de la vida because those are the training grounds. Si tú pones atención cómo está organizada la universidad, tú vas a ver que así está organizado nuestro país y todos los recursos que corresponden a este país. Who's at the top? Who has the highest positions? Who controls the most resources? And you're going to get a picture of what this country is run. That's why we went to student government. That's why we went to join all the student groups. We wanted to see how things operated. Y esas lecciones siempre se han quedado conmigo. Y se quedarán con ustedes, ¿no? Participen en su experiencia. Y son los momentos más bonitos de la vida, ¿no? Estas amistades, yo no he visto a David en años, pero yo lo veo, yo lo abrazo igual, él es mi hermano, ¿no? A Pablo, a Corina, a todos los que formaron parte del Pueblo Unido, ¿no? Yo los veo, yo sé que si yo necesito algo, van a estar ahí para mí. Son amistades de toda la vida. So, toda la gente que ustedes conocen ahorita van a ser amistades de la vida.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias otra vez por dejarnos hablar sobre su testimonio y es muy poderoso. Muchas gracias por su tiempo y pues esa fue la última pregunta. Gracias.